What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of How to Get Away with the JD. I apologize for not posting an episode last week. I was in the middle of final, so I'm sorry I had to put me first. 3-0 and all, I'm trying to graduate. But we are back with another episode of How to Get Away with the JD, and I think this is one of the most important episodes of this season, especially given the times that we are in. We're going to talk about OCIs and how to get you guys a job, proper interviewing tips, the whole 9 yards, because for my 1Ls, it's literally going to be your first experience, and it kind of sucks that this is kind of where we are in life now. But then for my 2Ls who are looking for a job, and even my 3Ls who may not have secured a job or things happen because of COVID, want to make sure that you guys are prepared to know what exactly it looks like to have a successful interview. So with me today, I have a special guest, and I will let her introduce herself, and then we will get started with the conversation.
Sure, thank you. So my name is Jennifer McGarr, and I am the Assistant Dean for Career Development and Student Services here at the University of Missouri. And we are gearing up we are calling it OZI this year for on Zoom interviews. I can't claim that. Karen Nealon, our communications director, came up with that. But yes, our OCIs will be virtual this year as they are across the nation. So we're figuring out how that's going to look.
I like that. I think we should kind of try to coin that OZI.
Coin it? I think so. I know. I told as soon as she said it, I said I'm stealing that for sure. So
I think that's a really good one. But from your experience, you've done this for forever, coached us through it, the whole 9 yards. And I know there's a lot of people who talk about, oh, well, I don't know what this looks like, or like, how can I do this? Off the top, what do you think is probably going to be one of the biggest changes between OCI versus OZI?
So I will say that, when we throw out that term OCI, traditionally, what we have always meant is employers who want to come on campus to interview students, so much so that they're willing to set aside a full day or a half day of interviews, and they select candidates in advance, and they come on and they interview several students back to back over the course of several hours, brief screening interviews, 20 to 30 minutes. And the idea is that from that day, they will select students who will then get a second round interview, at the employer's location. Some finalists will be selected for what we call callback interviews. And so that's kind of what we're referring to. Historically, what you see is that OCI has several phases, where the initial phase is traditionally the large law firms that come through first because they pay the most. And then after they come through, then we will, traditionally have employers come through that are mid-sized law firms. We'll have government, both federal and state. We'll have judicial clerkship interviews. We'll have, nonprofit organizations. In the past, those tend to be a mix of opportunities, and that's why they come second. Traditionally, with large law firms, not only do they pay higher, but they usually are interviewing 1Ls with the idea that after a 1L summer, you would return there for your 2L summer. When they're interviewing 2Ls, the idea is that you would return after your 2L summer to a permanent job afterward. So when you're getting out of that kind of first 2-3 weeks of OCI and into the other types of employers, it is not always so lockstep in terms of, it may just be a summer, not a summer plus an offer at the end. It may be unpaid. It may be eligible for an externship. It may also be paid. There may also be the possibility that you could join that employer after graduation, but it's more of a mix. And so I always encourage students to kind of not look at OCI as this monolithic process of either I can participate or I can't participate, or all OCI cares about is grades, because there's all different kinds of employers and they're looking for different things. And OCI is really for all students. It's not just for students who want to be at big law firms. You just have to pick apart the process and realize what are the parts that you're interested in and that are going to work for you.
I think that's interesting that you say that, because my 1L year, I think for the most part in like my class and everything, the focus was big law, big law, big law. So for those who don't know, typically in a non-COVID year, 1Ls would have their on-campus interviews, like start their interview process in the spring, coming back after winter break, because after December 1st, you can start applying for jobs, looking at jobs, whatever your career websites looks like at your different schools. That's how you start the process. And if you're fortunate, like we are at Mizzou, your career development office will also help you with your resume, cover letter, and all that other stuff before you start to send out those applications. For 2Ls, your OCIs are usually different. They're like right after summer. So as you're like coming off the summer, here I am leaving a job, probably looking for another job, or if I got lucky and they liked me, get an extended offer to come back the summer after. Now things look a little bit different. And one thing Dean McGar said that I think is like always important to stress is that OCIs are technically really for everybody. It just depends on what you're looking for in terms of employment. For my class, when I was going through the process, everybody wanted big law, big law, big law, big law. You had few interest in public interest things, and then some people who were okay with like wherever they landed, because some of us just didn't know what we wanted to do, which is fine. But the barrier for a lot of people in their mind is always grades. Like when you think of OCI, that's the first thing you think about. And there was always the myth that, oh, if you see somebody in a suit on campus getting ready for an interview, they're probably like the top 10% of their class, or like they have like a really good GPA. So a lot of people second semester, my 1L year, will sit around and look like, okay, did I do something wrong? Oh my God, like what is going on? And I know I was guilty of that. I had maybe 2 or 3 OCIs my 1L year. None of them panned out, and we'll talk about it. None of them panned out because of grades, but it was just interesting to see like how the mindset works. And I know a lot of people self-select themselves out of OCIs because they're looking at their classmates and thinking, oh, they're smarter than me, so I'm not going to go for that. Or, oh, I don't meet the criteria that's posted on the website, so I'm not going to go for it. So what are your thoughts on the self-selection out process and like the mental competition that you're putting yourself up against your classmates in terms of even applying for these jobs?
Sure, sure. And I think, anyone who has been one of my career advisees knows that I talk about, the persistent myth of law school, which is this idea that your grades define you and that the only way you can get a job is to have high grades. And it exists for a reason, because when else you come in and you hear it from each other. And I mean, we receive that message from various places. And one of the places that we receive that message from is from job postings that our office posts, right? If an employer wants to post a job with us and they say top 25% preferred, we can certainly talk to the employer, and frequently we'll have a situation where an employer will come to us and say, we receive so few applicants, and we'll say, well, perhaps you should look beyond just grades as the criteria for making your decisions. But I think that a lot of employers are still have this mindset of, I don't want to be inundated with applications. I don't want to have to go through hundreds of resumes. We know that we're only going to interview 8 students for 1 spot or something like that. And so they want to narrow the field. And the easiest way to do that is to put a GPA preference on there. But the reality that we can see that you all can't see, because you're not on our side of 1220 or on Simplicity or whatever law school is using. What we can see is that employers will regularly hire outside of their grade preference. But you're not going to get that job if you didn't apply for it. But the unfortunate thing that happens over and over again to reinforce that is that the more grade-oriented employers always come through first. And part of that is because if you can make $10,000 a month working for a big law firm during the summer, if MSPD, if the Missouri State Public Defender's Office or a prosecutor's office has come through first with their unpaid internship and you were offered that internship, and then 2 months later, you have an opportunity to interview with a firm that pays $10,000 a month and maybe guarantees you a slot for a permanent job at the end. That's too hard of a decision for any student to turn down, right? So essentially, it is better organized if we have the large law firms come through and recruit first. The problem is that ends up being the most visible representation of OCI. That's what students see. And if they dip their toe in that water and they don't have success, they think, well, that's it, right? I can't get a job. The OCI isn't for me, and all employers care about is grades. And the grades that I have aren't measuring up, and therefore forget it. And so that's kind of the unfortunate thing, and what I try to debunk with students. is that really it's not that cut and dry.
Mhm.
I think one of the hardest things for students to know is that you have to put yourself out there many times and receive a lot of no's. And I think that if you look at, if you look at most practicing attorneys' bios on their websites, if you look at my background experience, I look like I went to Georgetown for law school, and my first job out of law school is with a big New York law firm. So that seems really, really like maybe I never had any challenges in my job search. But I actually interviewed through. I did very extensive interviewing, and at one time back in the day, because I'm older, we actually used to get paper letters in the mail when we got a rejection from a law firm. And at one point, I had saved all my rejection letters, and I had over 300. And it's one of the biggest regrets of my life that I had held on to them for a very long time. And then once I was a practicing attorney, I was like, what am I saving these for? Get rid of them. But not knowing that I would one day work in career development, and I wish that I had saved them just so that I could have that as a visual representation to students. But there will always be no's along the way. You are going to put yourself out there many times, and you will have a lot of no's. And so it's really hard when that's happening to you to put things in perspective and to say, I'm going to keep trying. One of the things that we try to do is have, in working with students with their materials, with their application materials like cover letter, resume, to have them pretty much as set as possible, so that way the actual application process is not that onerous, and it's just like you just keep applying, just keep submitting them, because you never know what the pool is going to be like for any given job. And you might talk yourself out of it thinking like, I know there's people with a higher GPA than me, or I know there's people who have more experience, that came to law school with some previous experience, or did something their 1L summer that, puts them ahead of me. But you don't know that they saw that job posting and decided to apply on that given day. So, you never know what the pool is going to look like. But I do think it's really common for us to see employers come in kind of with this a job description that looks like it's very grade oriented, but at the end of the day, who they select is the best fit for the job, and it may not be the person with the highest grades.
I like that a lot. And 300 no's and you save them all.
300 no's.
That's crazy. I literally have thrown away or deleted, because we're in the mailbox age now. I deleted a good amount of them, but I also too, like, and I've told people who've watched the podcast before, I got a lot of no's. 1L year, I got a whole lot of no's, and it was like very depressing, because it's just like, wow, okay, well, I guess I'm not gonna have a job, but I kind of need a job to then have a job next. So like, how does this work? So when I was doing OCIs, I always felt like I was sitting in the room, you try to break the ice and you try to be nice and the whole 9 yards, the whole thing. And then you don't get it, or they say no, or like, and my favorite line is always, we wish you the best as you're qualified. You'll find something. If I was qualified, why don't you take me? Take me, please. So I had to get used to the idea of no, like a delay is not a denial. And I tell people that all the time now. Like, I had to go through all these no's. One, because I really didn't know what I was doing. As a first generation law student, I was just like following the crowd. So it was like, oh, big law, big law, big law. Okay. All right. Let me apply here. And then it was like, as you're getting like those no's, or like going to second round to still getting no's, I was like, okay, well, what am I going to do now? And so I got fortunate enough, because I applied off a whim to a judicial summer clerkship in Jeff City with the magistrate judge. And I learned so much from that. And he was able to teach me the ins and outs of like big law versus in-house versus public interest. Like, I got a better gauge of what the world looked like after all those no's and after that one summer experience. So when I turned around and started getting no's again, coming into 2L year, and then finally getting State Farm, which is like, again, like one of the rare positions for somebody, one, coming straight out of law school, but then two, having the experience to at least be in-house at all. It was invaluable to me. And it's because I didn't stop. So for anybody listening, watching, take advice from the both of us, regardless of how many no's you get, if you save them, if you delete them like me, keep going. Keep going. At some point, somebody will say yes, and that one yes might change your whole perspective on how you see things. And then, for this is my goal at least. When you get to those positions, if you get the full time offer and things, get on the hiring committees, get on those internship committees, get to understand what the criteria looks like. Because one of my summer projects at State Farm was reworking the job description for schools, because we had told them as 4 interns that we almost didn't apply to the job because we saw top 10%. I'm not in the top 10% of the class. Like, we saw these things and we were like, oh, okay, yeah, no, we don't qualify. But at that point, I was literally like, I'm just going to go throw caution to the wind and just do it. So we were telling them that, and they were receptive enough to say, okay, well, in an ideal world, if you could write the job description, what would it say? How would you sell us to somebody like you? So get on those committees, do those things, because you can't change a profession if you let old ways still get in the way. But there's something that you said earlier that I think is interesting, and that I thought about a lot when I think about like current 1Ls that I know, some 2Ls. Some people come into law school and don't know what they want to do. Some of us have taken years off. Some people go straight through. A lot of people follow the crowd in terms of what sounds good to try to get the experience. And then it all just boils down to OCIs, and then they start stressing themselves out, right? What would be your advice for somebody who doesn't even know if they want to do big law versus like public interest or in-house corporate work in general? What would you say to those people who are kind of like, I really don't know what's going on, in order for them to get an idea of like what to apply to and figure that out?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think, you're also absolutely correct that we'll have students come in, if you read the admissions essays that students submit when they're applying to law school, it's not true that 90% of them say they want to work at a big law firm. But then when you actually start looking at kind of OCI, the buzz kind of hits and people are like, "Oh, you want to do that job?" And students get sucked into it because it's like, "Oh, well, that's what everybody wants. So I guess I want that too." I think that when you think of law school, it comes at a very critical time. It's graduate school. You're looking at people who are in their mid to late 20s primarily, although there's exceptions, on both ends of that. And it's at a time, I think, when people are really, you're investing so much energy and time and money into this project of law school, and you want to get a sign that you have a future in the law, and you want something that you can pin your hat on that defines you, right? I'm going to be a prosecutor, or I'm going to be, a corporate transactional lawyer, whatever that thing is. I think students feel a lot of pressure immediately to figure out what that thing is, and then to pick it. And the idea is that you'll join that you'll do that right out of law school, and you'll do that for the rest of your career. And so students are kind of looking for that thing. And some students come in very clear with their mindset of what they want, and some students come in much more open to different things. But regardless, they feel the pressure of that kind of that first job out of law school being your career. And so I think that if you can take a step back from that and think about the skills that you want to develop in yourself, rather than looking at the type of job or the type of employer that you work for. Not only will you have more mobility throughout your career and probably more success throughout your career, but you can then, I think, weather the storms of getting the no's without it, destroying your confidence the way it would if you're like, I want to be this, and so I'm going to apply for those jobs. If I don't get them, that means I'll never be this thing that I want. And so, I think that students look and they're taking their classes. They're like, well, I like contracts, so I guess that means I want to do transactional. Or I as a 2L, I took family law and I liked it, so I guess I'll do family law. Kind of a lot of times students' focus is on the subject matter of the what they want to practice, and based on liking a course, they think that's the job for them. But the reality is, legal jobs, there's a huge variety of legal jobs. There are jobs that involve a lot of public speaking. There are jobs that don't. There are jobs that involve, a lot of trial work. There are jobs that involve no trial work whatsoever. There are jobs that involve, numbers and finances. There are jobs that involve, human suffering. And, there's just a whole range of things that you can do in law. And so I think looking at it as at the subject matter only of what you're passionate about or what you enjoyed studying is a really limiting way to look at it, and that you should kind of open it up and think about what are the skills that lawyers use that I feel like I already have, that I
Mhm.
feel good when I'm doing them. I feel confident in my ability to do them. I would like to work on them and expand them in some way. And then you can talk with your career development advisor. You can talk with, as you did with the judge that you interned, for with the summer. You can talk with, if you have some professional mentors, you can talk with faculty members, but kind of looking at what are the types of jobs where I would build those skills. And then if you focus on skill development, then you're going to have a wider range of jobs that you could apply for, that you're interested in. And if you spent some time doing that work, then when you go into the interview, you're also better prepared for the interview, because you can say, this is something I care a lot about. I'm really good at this. I have this experience doing it. And I know it's critical to your organization that an incoming intern would be good at that.
Mhm.
So here's how I would use it in the job. So you're a much better candidate for the job. You're more confident. You've done the work for the employer in terms of showing how you're capable of doing their position. And as a result, you're going to have better success in your interviews. And then if you focus on building your skills, then it takes the focus off of GPA as the main indicator of your success.
I agree with all of that wholeheartedly. And I think, yeah, I think that was one thing I had to learn. It was like, okay, let's take a step back and figure out, one, what are my current skill sets? Two, what do I want to improve as a lawyer? And I think one of my biggest one was always writing for me, which is why I was glad I got the clerkship first, because it forced me to write, and that has paid off immensely. But one thing, well, several things, and I guess we'll just break this process down to begin with. First things first, is something that we stress a lot between like upperclassmen and then career development, and like anybody, I guess anybody in a law school will tell a lot of people who come in, is extracurriculars and like being involved in activities. And a lot of people have, at least in the past couple of weeks alone, have asked me, especially one else, should I do moot court? Should I do mock trial? What's this deal with journal? Like, who looks at this? Like, how important are these things to the application process? And I'm like, honestly, it really, and the legal answer applies here. It depends, right? Like, it just depends on like one, where you're applying, and two, what are the things that you want to do? Because I would never recommend that you do something just for an employer's benefit. You kind of want to do it for you, because if not, you'll be miserable. So from your experience in terms of looking at what employers look for, and then what traps and myths there are around these extracurriculars, what are your thoughts about students getting involved, or what should they start paying attention to in terms of involvement? Because they don't have to be involved in everything, and that's literally the common misconception.
Right. And, if you're involved in everything, you're going to get burned out. And, your classes will, your courses will suffer as a result, and you'll be more stressed out around finals. And,
Mhm.
it's a balancing act. What I always try to tell students, and I think that you made a really good point. You do want to focus on building the skills that you already have, but there's a science involved in sort of planning your career. And so you do want to look at the skills that you already know you have and figure out how best to highlight those and how best to build on those. But you do also want to look at, I always recommend for students that you kind of develop two or three kind of careers in the law, career paths that you think you could probably follow. So that at the time that you graduate, there's likely one that's going to be available at that time. It may not be all three, but one. And so if you're kind of looking ahead and thinking, this is something I can see myself doing, then you want to actually look, like you were saying when you were at State Farm, look at the job description. What do they expect somebody to be able to do in that position? What are the day-to-day tasks? Do I have those things? And if you don't, if there's an area that you want to work on, then you want to seek out opportunities to build on those. And so when you're looking at all of the different potential extracurriculars, right, that's one of the things you're looking for is where can you, get involved so that you're managing your time wisely. You don't have unlimited amounts of time. So pick selectively, and pick those things where you will have an opportunity to build skills that you want to be able to demonstrate to employers that you have. And if you do that, then you're making good choices. But then the second thing is you're also human and you want to have fun and you want to enjoy. And for a lot of students, extracurricular activities are really their social outlet. In addition to being a ton of work and being challenging and everything else, it is where you meet your friends and you meet the people who will become your colleagues and can help you down the road in ways that you can't even imagine in your future legal career. So you do also want to pick activities based on your interest and that type of thing. But I would say that nothing is wasted in that regard. So don't think, oh, my 1L year, I got really involved in the student health law organization, but it turns out I don't really want to do health law at all. Because for us, from the career development office perspective, everything is a transferable skill, right? So if you've been engaged in some sort of leadership activity in one capacity, the skills that you developed in that opportunity will transfer to some other job that you're doing. And so for us, it's always about just how you phrase it, right? It's how to highlight it in a way that an employer is able to see that's a valuable experience and that it makes sense to them, even if it is a different subject matter or even if it is in a different context.
Okay. Well, guys, we're going to take a quick break. And then when we come back, we're actually going to break down some of the myths in terms of the resume, the cover letter, and then give you guys some tips about actually interviewing on Zoom. So we'll be right back. And we're back. All right. So if you guys have been paying attention, we've been trying to make sure that you get as much knowledge as possible going into OCI, OZI season, making sure we guys get you guys a job, right? Like focusing on that. That's our goal, right? So with that being said, the two, arguably three, but the two most consistent portions of job applications that you'll see are the resume and the cover letter. And then sometimes there might be a writing sample or things that jobs apply for. So Dean McGar, what do you see in terms of students' resumes, cover letters, sometimes writing samples that are like roadblocks or like hazard signs to stay away from when crafting these documents? Because I was told, like you want to be able to tell a story, you want to be able to make sure that they get to know you the best way possible to get your foot in the door. And I know there's ways that you can kind of take your foot out the door. So I want to talk about those with those three documents.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I start with resumes. A lot of people think of the cover letter as your introduction to the employer, but it has always been my experience that the resume is the first thing they look at, and they might look at the cover letter second. If the resume warrants another look, then they'll go to the cover letter. So we start with resumes, and the traditional legal resume is one page. There are some exceptions for public interest and for government, especially federal government. And so that's something that that you can talk with your career development advisors and get their opinion on that. And there's a lot of research available online to talk through those exceptions. But generally speaking, as a 1L or 2L, a one-page resume is going to be all you need. That means every spot on there is prime real estate. And so you want to turn a really critical eye. And I think it's hard for students to kind of cut out some of the things that they feel like are really important. Ideally with students, I like to end up having a resume that they can use across many applications without having to standardize it for each. But depending on the student and their experience, they might have some really relevant experience to a specific area of law, and we might have a longer resume that includes a lot more of that for those job applications. And then if they're thinking they do want to cast a broader net, have one that's more standard for the jobs that won't involve that subject matter. So there's, a variety of ways to do it. But generally speaking, you want to, have each thing that you list count for something. You want to make it matter. So you're looking through, your any activities that you have done in undergrad or in law school. You're looking through any extracurriculars. You're looking at any awards or distinctions or honors that you've received, and you're going to make sure to highlight those. And some people feel uncomfortable for that because it feels like bragging or whatever, but it is expected to be included. And the assumption, if you don't have it, is that it didn't happen. So you want to make sure to put it on your resume. And then when it comes to background experience, I would say that some students come to law school like you with a lot of background experience, and other students come with very little. Occasionally, some students will come through with very little background experience. And so in that situation, we're kind of building it up and identifying which experiences, it could be a senior capstone or thesis that they did in undergrad. It could be a volunteer project they worked on or something like that, but we're looking to kind of round things out and show some experience. But essentially, you're kind of towing that line between you're not really listing job duties, but you're highlighting the skills that you attained in the job that you think an employer would be interested in. And so for lawyers, there's all kinds of, we give students these resources, but they're available online. There are all sorts of, lists of skills that lawyers believe are critical to the job of lawyering. Schultz and Zedek have critical lawyering factors, but there are all kinds of lists available where you can look at what are the skills that lawyers think are valuable for attorneys to have. And then you can kind of like a checklist, just go through and be like, I have this because in this job I did this. And you're just making sure that your bullet points demonstrate the skills that you've developed. So that's kind of key to the resume. Obviously, resume, cover letter, you talked about taking your foot out the door. Lawyers are writers. I like to tell students that if you're a 1L and you're in your first summer job, the lawyer that is your supervising attorney knows that you'll, make some mistakes on the law sometimes, and you may not have really developed your instincts for how the law applies in a given situation because you're new. And they understand that, and they're happy to work with you on that. They know when they're hiring a 1L, they know when they're hiring a 2L. What they will not work with you on is typos and grammar mistakes and little edit. They do not like that. They do not like that, and they are not happy to see it. And so if you have that in your resume or cover letter, we've had numerous employers over the years, and I try to tell students this, and it's heartbreaking when it happens, but we have absolutely had employers say, I saw some typos, and that's how we decided who we would interview and who we wouldn't. Anyone who had typos or errors in their cover letter, we decided to cut them. So unfortunately, that's something you got to be really careful of. Read it yourself, have somebody else read it. Unlike your writing sample, your cover letter and resume can go through as many edits as you want. So it's always helpful to have outside people take a look at it, but you do want to make sure that it has no errors. With regard to the cover letter, that is something that you want to personalize a little bit more for each job that you're applying to. Although we can usually get it to the point where we have kind of 2 or 3 good paragraphs that stay roughly the same. And then there's a few pieces that you change here and there based on the job that you're applying to. Again, making it less onerous to keep applying to different jobs because you want to keep applying to jobs over and over again until you get that yes. So we want to make that as a streamlined process. But basically in the cover letter, what you're doing is you're doing the employer's job of figuring out how your experience and background and education would work for them. And so the cover letter is really about, it's not just a, kind of your resume written out in paragraph form. It is really, here's what I would bring. So we encourage students to take 2 to 3 skills at the outset that they know. And when I'm reading a resume at this point, because I've looked at so many, the 3 jump out at me right away, right? I'm like, I see you, entrepreneurship, I see this, I see, So you want to pick 3 skills that that you have, that you can back up with data, with your facts. And then those are the three that you're going to highlight in your cover letter. And so part of your work is just figuring out how would this help the employer if I brought this to them.
Okay, guys, I hope you are taking notes, writing all this down because this is very important, very important. But from there, after you send in your application, resume, cover letter, optional sometimes writing example, depending on what it looks like, then we get to the interview process. And like we said, this year, the interview process looks different, but for the most part, the content's probably still going to stay the same. And one of the major things that, for at least for the interview, is sometimes like the legal aesthetic, the dress code, the whole 9 yards. Though we are on Zoom, and you can probably just see like chest up in most cases and other things of that nature. There is still a dress code and still a way to do things, right? And I didn't really know about this dress code thing. I knew like dark colors, all that other stuff. But then we get to these splashes of color that are no-nos. And I wear earrings, so I don't wear my earrings during interviews because depending on where you're applying, people aren't used to these yet. So as far as dress code goes, when doing these interviews, what would be your recommendation to students in order to be prepared for those things?
Sure, sure. I would say that, it's hard for me to talk about dress code in a way because to me personally, I don't think it should be employers focus in the way that it is. But that said, you have to play the game if you want the job, right?
Right.
And so for me, it is more useful to think of the dress code as a uniform,
Mhm.
and that a legal employer wants to see that you can wear the lawyer uniform, that you can wear it for an interview, and if need be, you can wear it for a meeting with a client, you can wear it to court, you can wear it for, some sort of a mediation, some kind of event where you have to put on your lawyer uniform. So what they're really looking for is that. It doesn't mean that they're using it as a basis to make assumptions about your personality or anything else, but they want to see that if it is necessary to wear the uniform, you know how to put it on.
Mhm.
So to me, the lawyer uniform is a suit, right? And the basics are it's a suit. And it should generally be a suit where, when you think about a lawyer in front of a jury, right? If the jury is looking at the jewelry that you're wearing or looking at something that you're wearing that stands out as being particularly eye-catching, right? They're focusing on that,
Mhm.
and they're focusing on you, whether they like you, whether they believe you, whether they think that you're a good lawyer or not, instead of focusing on the merits of your case. So the lawyer uniform is traditionally a very conservative, kind of old school style suit. But it is like that for a reason. And the reason is that it should just read as lawyer. And the idea is that way, the jury, the judge, anyone who's looking at your lawyering is focusing on your message and the arguments you're making instead of you and your personality. So with that in mind, I would say that's kind of why a lot of the recommendations and tips and advice and things like that have come around interview dressing have come up, is because they're kind of designed at getting it at that outcome for students.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, I think you and I both know that a lot of the advice falls into the category of discriminatory, racially discriminatory, heteronormative, and all kinds of biases and stereotypes play into the advice that students have gotten over the years. So I think that for each student, they kind of have to answer that question on an individual level, because we've had students kind of with all different thoughts on that. Some students are like, I don't want to work at a place where I don't feel like I can be myself. This is who I am, and this is how I appear. And we have had other students say, well, I'll take it off for the interview, and then when I get the job, I'll decide. Then they'll see who I am, and that's all of those calculations are fine. I think that the reality is, we forget because of the no's, because of the fact that you're putting yourself out there and a lot of times not being selected for a job. We forget that it is a mutual process, and that you do have some power you're selecting the employer as well. It's not just hoping that anyone will take you. You have some choices, and so that's kind of a decision that students have to make. But I think that if you focus on having a dark colored suit, and removing anything that is particularly eye catching, that should give most employers the confidence that you know how to wear the lawyer suit, and that you have good judgment about when it needs to be put on.
100% agree. My first interview I had, yeah, my first interview I had a navy suit, a light blue shirt, and maybe a brown and blue-ish as tie or whatever. But I also had my hoops in and a lapel flower. And these and that kind of, that's like the first thing somebody will look at. And I was like, oh, I think I look good. But
I'm
somebody
sure you did.
I thought I looked good, but somebody I know had saw the picture a few days later, and they were like, "Oh, so is that what you wore to your interview?" And I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely." And he was just breaking it down from the perspective of, well, it looks flashy, it's not very, dialed down. So from there, it was a whole mental gymnastics game, and I was like, "Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to do that?" But at the end of the day, you do it. So I had to tone it down for that time. And then I got fortunate enough because when COVID hit, my internship with State Farm was online. So they got the polos since I didn't have to wear a suit. They got the earrings. These were not coming out for anybody, and I still got the job. So I'm the person who believes do what you have to do to get your foot in the door. And then once you're there, they're going to have to figure out who you are anyway. So
I think that, it's funny because I also think too that what you'll see is that lawyers they go through phases, right? Because early in your career, when you're building your reputation, kind of more experienced lawyers are like, no, you just go with like
Mhm.
the standard, right? But then as you become an experienced professional, as you get better at your craft of lawyering, then that becomes the flower becomes your calling card, and people know you because of it, and all kinds of trial lawyers will develop their signature style, like really wide pinstripes or jeans in cord, or whatever it is. They'll kind of experiment with it as a branding tool, but early in your career, they just want to see that you can put it on if necessary, and that that there's times when you have to.
I 100% agree. Another part of the interview process, and this is something that I know we stress at Mizzou, and this is something we do for the 1Ls when they start signing up for like their mock interviews and things, asking questions to employers, and then also researching the employer before they get in the interview. How do both of those play a part into the overall impression of on the employer, and then potentially moving them on to whether it's a second round interview or maybe a direct job offer, things of that nature?
Sure. These are really good questions. I think that, one of the things that you mentioned, and that it was true for me, I was, not, did not come from a family of lawyers.
Mhm.
And I see this with some of our students who don't have experience with the legal community. You need to be aware in preparing for interviews that a law firm website is a marketing tool, right? It is not necessarily, it's like your resume, it's the highlights, but it's not the whole picture.
Mhm.
And so one of the things that I always encourage students to do is to seek out what I call insider information. So some people who grew up with, they have a parent who's an attorney, they have a grandparent who's an attorney, they've kind of grown up within a given legal community. They have access to a lot of insider information that they don't even necessarily realize other people don't have, but that people who aren't coming from that background don't have. So the question is, how do you get that insider information? And you're going to get that information from your career development office, talking to them. I have an interview with this firm. What do you know about it that goes beyond what I would just find on their website if I looked? And then we can say, oh, well, I actually was in a recruiter's meeting just last week, and they mentioned that they're only hiring for litigation. They don't have any transactional jobs, right? So that's a little piece of information that's suddenly going to change kind of how you interview because you just learned it. that you wouldn't otherwise have. And then you can do the same thing. We'll always, rush. If you have an interview or a callback interview, we'll rush to find an alum who has worked at the firm previously who isn't currently there
Mhm.
that you can reach out to. And our alums are fantastic about saying, absolutely, I'll talk to somebody. Now, if you reach out to someone who's currently at the firm, they have to tell their recruiters that they talked to you. But if you reach out to somebody who has left the firm, they can say anything and no one has to know that you're doing your background work like that. It can be really helpful to understand, or I mean, even things like, oh, they just lost this huge case. So just make sure not to talk about this at all because it's a real sore spot right now. So there's all kinds of things like that you can learn going into your interview above and beyond just looking at their website. Obviously, you should do that. You should look at their website and get to know what they do. You should go back to the initial job posting and refresh yourself and do that work that we talked about of kind of looking at your resume, looking at the job posting and figuring out where there's some synergies or connections. Any interviewers, if you've been given the interviewers' names in advance, you can do background research on them. You can look at their bio, you can look at their LinkedIn. I always tell students, if you find things outside of professional, stop. Don't go too deep into the background, but anything professional is fair game to talk about in an interview, and it's not weird. It just looks like you're prepared. And then, the other thing to pay attention to that we haven't really talked about, in this age of OZIs, most virtual interviews are going to be very much like a face-to-face interview, right? The differences there end up being negligible, after a minute. There's the potential for internet connections cutting out. There's the potential for kind of interrupting each other because you can't always hear when they've stopped speaking or it's your turn to start. But beyond that, it's pretty much like a face-to-face conversation. And so you want to kind of prepare for that and, focus on your lighting, focus on what's behind you, come up with a professional background or create a virtual background. But other than that, it's just like a regular interview. But students should also be aware that that employers are experimenting with all kinds of different types of interviews as well. Because this is something they were looking at even before COVID, but certainly with the changes of COVID, they're rolling them out much more so now. But there is the potential that your interview is going to involve a portion where you are sent kind of a link to go in and record answers. But have you had one of those? Okay, yeah.
Ryan Cave in my 1L year, and I thought it was the strangest thing. They said, "Here's your interview," and I'm like, okay. I'm like freaking out. I get the link, and it's I think maybe 4 questions that you read prior to, because you have to read them, and then you click start, and then the camera goes, and you have to record yourself answering these questions. And I don't think I got a redo, and then you had to submit. So I was like, okay, this is different.
Right.
I didn't get it.
And, we've had employers who the student thinks that they have a callback interview, and they do,
Mhm.
and it's a virtual callback. So it's, essentially like an OCI, but they're interviewing with several different attorneys. And then in a portion of the interview, they're like, okay, and now you're going to go into the like private record yourself alone time where you do this. And usually they're set up so that either they give you a prompt and you have a period of time to kind of plan your answer and then you can record, or they're set up where you can re-record your answer like 2 or 3 times till you get it right. And then you're clicking on submit. So you do want to pay attention to, exactly what the interview format is going to be and think about how to prepare for that. Other than that, though, with virtual interviews, there's a lot of benefits to it as well in terms of you can have notes in front of you and you can refer back to them on a regular basis. If you want to put together your questions, as you mentioned, when the employer says, do you have any questions for me? You can have a list of questions there that you can look at. I always encourage students to make sure that your camera is at a good level and that it is facing forward so that you're not doing this thing or or this thing where you're looking in a different direction than the camera. And so, and I always look at myself, like when when I'm recording something. So make sure that yourself is close to your camera, so it's not obvious that you're watching yourself and it looks like you're looking at the other person. I mean, I do check in, but I don't know why I'm always making sure I'm not doing something weird, I guess. So, just trying to kind of plan all that out can be helpful with the Zoom version. But be ready and kind of think about it. And if you have questions, you're always welcome to talk to us about sort of, okay, this new format. They're now asking me to do this different thing, and I've never done it before. What should I do? But a lot of the same criteria of what makes for a successful interview in person is going to be there as well. I had an opportunity just recently to view some software, and I was offered a free trial to look at some software, and you do a virtual interview of the kind that we had talked about, where you're recording your answers, and then they actually give you a score on all these different factors like eye contact and hand motions, and the all the verbal fillers that you use, like and then you can keep re-recording your answers over and over again and trying to get a better score. And they actually have like optimal percentages where you're supposed to smile like 25% of the time, and you're supposed to have hand motions 15% of the time. So some hand motions, but not too many hand motions, and I was like, if I had access to this, I think I would just overthink it. I would be like, and so I think that, it would just be so weird to watch it. I think there would be a learning curve where it would get much worse before it gets better, I think, as you start being more aware of all the things that you do. But the reality is that it's just like a regular in-person interview for the most part. I will say that if there's any kind of connectivity issues, I think that students sometimes feel reluctant to ask an interviewer to repeat a question or to say that they didn't understand a question. But I think it's really clear on the part of the interviewer that if you kind of guess and answer the wrong question, that creates a very negative impression in them, because they're imagining that if you work together, that like you'll be on two different pages, and you won't. But if you just say, I'm sorry, it cut out for a second. Could you repeat that question? That comes across much better. So don't be shy about asking for clarification on a question, even if you just didn't understand it. Rather than trying to answer what you think is the question and kind of being on a completely different wavelength than your interviewer.
I completely agree with that, because the whole video thing really threw me off, and I prefer in-person interviews, but also like Zoom isn't the worst place, or whatever platform most people do isn't the worst place, because then you also don't have to wear the full suit. You can wear like shorts or something, and just make sure that they can't see the shorts, right? Like that, it's beautiful.
Make sure they can't see the shorts. Be clothed on the bottom. It doesn't have to be the suit bottom, but wear clothes on the bottom. Some garment should be on the bottom half.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that it's certainly something we know that we have students who are in all different kinds of situations in terms of how they're handling COVID, and you have people who have multiple roommates, you have people who have children in their home, you have, and that can be really challenging. Do your best to find a place that is quiet and private, and also COVID safe. And, we have spaces available at the law school, but, depending on who's listening, and spend a little time kind of thinking that through, and then, do your best to give yourself at least some quiet, uninterrupted time to get your interview done. And we always say no beds or toilets or things like that in the background, if at all possible. You can play with camera angles to get those things out of the way. Or, we did the 1L career boot camp recently, and afterward, one of the alums was saying that my lighting was so good. And I'm like, I'm sitting in the corner of my bedroom and I have every table lamp in my house. I made my own ring light by just having all the table lamps around me. But focus a little bit on lighting, and yeah, you only have to be professional from here up. So
Yeah, I bought myself a little desk ring. I have like a ring light for when I do like bigger things, but like
yeah,
on the computer, I bought one of the little desk ring lights because they're like $15 off Amazon.
oh.
Superior, superior.
Yeah, yeah, I'm really close to buying one. I'm
I
really close.
go for it, and then you can keep your phone in like the little holder. So if you ever just want to like take like a work selfie or something, it's like right there, right? It's fine, it's fine.
Yeah.
I say go for it. But I want to thank Dean McGar for stopping by. And before we get out of here, I want to ask: do you have any last minute tips, tricks, anything to get students prepared for the upcoming interview season? Because almost everybody will be interviewing in the spring. It'll no longer just be like 1Ls, 2Ls. Everybody will be doing it. So do you have any last minute tips for the listeners?
I think that, I don't want to end on a low note, but I will say that the reality, I will never not tell students the real deal. The reality is that we are on, in an economic downturn related to COVID. And I think that a lot of students are going to have to be creative about what types of jobs they take. And unfortunately, the hard truth is going to be that there are fewer jobs, and that they will be competitive. They will be more competitive because there are fewer jobs, and that you're going to have to get creative about what job you end up doing. But the positive side of that is that what we saw from, I've been in this job long enough that I've seen the economic downturn that happened in 2008, 2009, 2010, when the legal job market was absolutely horrible. And now we have the benefit of 10 years of experience of watching those alumni that graduated that time, and kind of seeing how they worked their way out of that situation. And I think that what we have seen is that if you focus on building your skills, there's a way out. You can absolutely have whatever career in the law you want, as long as you seek out opportunities to build your skills as a lawyer, and you think of that first job, even if it's not the one you wanted or the one that you hope for, is your stepping stone. And so you want to get everything out of it that you possibly can. Learn as much as you can, come at it with the attitude of, I want to be the best lawyer I can be in the context of this job, and identify kind of how to do the things that I need to do. um, you know the economy will pick up, and there will be a lot of opportunities available for people who've spent this time kind of building their skills. And the second thing that that students don't always like to hear, but that has certainly been our observation over the years, is that you have to build your network. You have to identify attorneys, alumni, could be fraternity brothers or sorority sisters from undergrad. It could be a friend of a friend who has a parent who's a lawyer. Could be other, any way that you can start networking with lawyers, and then build kind of ongoing relationships with them. So you're asking them for contacts in, say, Chicago. I want to work in Chicago after graduation. Who do you know who's an attorney in Chicago? And then you reach out to those attorneys. And then when you do, you reach back to the original one and you say, I talked to them. They were so helpful. Thank you so much. And then 6 months later, you say, by the way, I wanted to let you know I did get a job in Chicago in the summer, and this is what I'm going to be doing. And this, nobody likes doing that. It's not fun. And sure, it's extra work and you're already busy and overwhelmed. It doesn't have to take very long. It may be that eight, eight, 8/9 of the people you reach out to might ignore your emails. But at the end of the day, you're going to build a network of people who know you exist, and that's going to help you in immeasurable ways. And so the people who do that and do that consistently, and just, again, just don't care that some people are ignoring you and blowing you off. They're unstoppable. I mean, there's really nothing that they can't achieve in their careers. And we've seen our alumni who do that. They can have whatever career they want because they do it consistently. And that's regardless of regardless of grades, regardless of what their first job was, regardless of that. That is really the secret weapon to having having a lot of flexibility in your career and being able to shape it to be whatever you want, is if you do that consistent networking and skill building.
100%. And I hope you guys took notes throughout this entire episode. But I want to thank Dean McGar again for coming and talking to you guys a little bit about campus interviews, Zoom interviews. OCI is now my new favorite thing. Making sure that you guys are prepared for those. Make sure that you guys like, comment, and subscribe to not miss any more of this season of How to Get Away with the JD. And until next time, we will see you soon. Peace.